Get more confidence. Get that promotion. Get moving up the corporate ladder. Get a better gig with an MBA from Mays Business School at Texas A&M University. Whether you're starting out or stepping up, now you can take your career to a whole new level with a full-time MBA in College Station and convenient weekend options at Houston City Center. Texas A&M has a program to suit your schedule. Visit mba.tamu.edu. And Giga Maggie.
Howdy, welcome to Mays MasterCast. I'm Shannon Deere, the Assistant Dean for Graduate Programs, here with your amazing, but not spelled the traditional way, with a Mays Business School in the middle of it. Amazing host, Ben Wiggins.
Thanks, Shannon. How are you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
It's a beautiful day in Aggieland.
It's maybe the most beautiful day in Aggieland today.
Pretty great.
Love the weather. It's amazing. Beautiful.
It's brisk.
We went to Austin yesterday to rock climb outside, which we had not done before. That was the first time, and it was amazing. It was fabulous. So
was it
beautiful.
Amazing with a Mays Business School in the middle?
No, it was just a regular amazing because it didn't work for Mays Business School. So, the park didn't. But it was lovely. It was a great day.
Yes. I'm glad you had a good time. My weekend was good. We had to cancel a couple of plans because of but there is no such thing as a minor COVID scare. So we had to make a couple of changes, but it seems like everything has worked out all right.
And everyone's okay.
Yeah, we're still pending results, but it seems like everything is fine.
Okay. Good.
So we made some changes and had a nice weekend, hung out with Brielle and went and did some things that would not endanger others. And so that was our weekend.
Good. Well, today on the show, we have Mark Schwartz. Mark is an executive professor in our business school. We are so honored to have him. He currently teaches undergraduate and graduate students in compensation management and employment discrimination law, which might sound boring to some, but is quite interesting according to this episode. So it was great to have him on. He has amazing experience. He has served as an expert witness in these HR related areas. And prior to teaching at Mays, he served as the chief HR officer and senior VP at Waste Management. He was a trusted advisor to the CEO with an emphasis on executive development and succession planning. He was responsible for all kinds of areas, including talent acquisition, learning and organizational development, labor relations, compensation and benefits. So he has lots of unique experiences to bring into this episode. He also talks about when the chief operating officer and president of Waste Management went on Undercover Boss in the episode, which was super interesting because he was behind the scenes doing all the legal work and research to make sure everything was above board and any changes they wanted to make were all within the realm of legal possibilities. So really interesting stuff. And Mark is an A&M former student. He has an undergraduate degree from here and then a JD from Baylor. So welcome, Mark, to the show.
Welcome indeed. And the image I always get in my mind is I love to think about how conversations between producers and legal and so forth went back in the day, because producers and executives don't really F-bomb each other anymore. That's not really how things are done, at least in the parts of the world that I saw in the entertainment business. But, back in those days, I have a feeling there was more of that, and the discussions might have been a good bit more energetic. Good word.
All right.
Welcome to the show. We welcome Mark Schwartz to the show. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Great to be here.
How was your weekend?
Not as good as I thought it was going to be. I was really anticipating watching some college football Saturday. And the Aggies got postponed. Auburn got postponed. LSU got postponed. So, I worked instead. So, like I said, it wasn't as good as I thought it was going to be. And then the Masters wasn't even exciting to watch because Dustin Johnson just had a 4 or 5 stroke lead pretty much the entire weekend. So no drama there, but it was all right.
Yeah, poor Tiger hit like a 10 or something on 12, I think it was.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, I texted some of my friends yesterday it's a long story, but I had the honor of actually playing Augusta twice, 2 consecutive days. And I always say that I am probably the worst golfer to have played at the best golf courses in the United States. And I can honestly say that I both times did better on number 12 than Tiger did yesterday. So that's my claim to fame now.
Yeah. Carry that with you forever. Mark, what is your favorite superpower?
I know this is a common answer, but if I could, it would be time travel, simply because I love history.
What is the first event that you would go back to if you could time travel? What's the one that jumps out in your mind as if I can only get one, I have to go there?
Oh, well, for me personally, it's an easy answer. I go back to the time of Christ.
Okay.
Being able to see it. From a non-religious standpoint, I would, believe it or not, I'd probably want to go back to the Battle of Britain and the way Churchill was running the company when London was being bombed continuously. Interestingly, my mother was actually there at that time as a small girl during the Battle of Britain. And so I've read a lot about it. And, books can only give you so much. You don't get the real feel for the emotions of the people, what they were going through.
Sure.
It's tremendous how much the Brits actually put up with during that time. But actually just being able to see it I would really love that.
It's funny because when you said that, the first thing that always jumps out to me about that, that particular flavor of of time travel is going back to, and again, holding aside the butterfly effect, I would love to know what Neville Chamberlain was thinking in 1939, I believe it was, because for a long time, he got a really bad rap in the history books. And then I think as time has gone forward, I think there was sort of a reverse, like a pendulum swing the other way, where the decision was like almost overrated for a while. And now I think it's kind of settled into a place of like, here's the complex analysis of what actually happened there. But
yeah, and unfortunately, I've been accused one of our lawyers in Canada of adopting Neville Chamberlain's appeasement approach when we were dealing with labor unions. And I remember his response was, well, who do you think you are, Churchill? And I said, only in my dreams.
You said Tiger Woods.
That's right.
All right. Where did you grow up?
Here in Houston, Texas.
What part of Houston specifically?
Well, we were on the southeast part of town when I was first growing up, and then we moved to Bel Air. For those of people who are unfamiliar with Houston, Bel Air is actually an incorporated city totally surrounded by Houston.
Now, when you say southeast part, do you mean like Deer Park or what?
No, the street, before it was renamed to Martin Luther King Boulevard, it was called South Park. And again, another reference, contemporary reference there. But no, it was just a working class area, as was Bel Air at the time. Very working class, in some cases lower middle class, which is what we were. And so my dad just moved. I think I was 9. Yeah, well, I can tell you the exact day we moved. It was July 20th, 1969, because we were having to pull stuff out of the moving van. Unfortunately, we put the television in first. So when the moving van was full, we had to pull everything else out to get to the television. And the reason why that was important is we had to run the TV inside of our new house, plug it in, and watch Neil Armstrong walk on the moon. That's why I remember the date specifically. And so yeah, in fact, until my dad passed away this September at age 90, almost 91, he still lived in the same house I grew up in.
That's incredible. So much happened in 1969.
Oh, and well, 68 also. So yeah, it was an interesting time. I keep telling people I'm a child of the 60s and they think hippie, but no, I was literally a child of the 60s.
Right, well, a child in the 60s.
Yeah.
Give us 60 seconds on your road to Mace.
I thought I was retired. We can go into that later. I was already volunteering for the master's program. They're trying, in fact, it will be established, I believe, in the fall of 21 in Houston.
Yeah.
And so I had done some guest lecturing at A&M. And one day, in fact, right before I was going to go work for a private equity firm, I was going to come out of retirement, Wendy Boswell, who's the head of the department in the management department, called and asked if I'd be interested in teaching employment discrimination law. I talked to the people at the private equity firm. I said, would y'all have an objection if I drove up, twice a week to College Station to teach this one course? They said, no problem.
Yeah.
Wendy then said, how about 2 sections because the class had filled up? I said, fine. And then she says, well, as long as you're teaching 2, why don't you go full time and teach a 3rd? Because she was teaching compensation management. I don't think she wanted to teach it, and I had a certain expertise in it.
Yeah.
So then I had to make a decision. Did I want to go work for this private equity firm or teach? And I always wanted to teach, so it was a real easy decision for me.
Fantastic. Backing up to the beginning, why did you originally want to get a JD?
Pretty much my entire life, everyone always told me I needed to go to law school.
Huh.
The reason being I liked to argue. I liked to argue with people. I would take the opposing view of an issue even if I didn't believe that view. I just wanted to engage in conversation and argument. And finally, a few people who got tired of it says, you might as well get paid for doing what you're doing and go and get your law degree and do that for a living. But actually, when I was at A&M, I was an economics major and I loved it. And so I looked at grad schools. And I tell the story, it's not exactly true, that it came down to a coin flip between going to grad school in economics or going to law school. I did flip a coin. It came up law, but I would have gone to law school anyway. If the coin had gone a different direction, I still would have gone to law school.
It would have been like one of those movie scenes where you just take the coin and turn it over.
Right. That's exactly right.
And then, so you go to law school, and then you work as an attorney for a while. You eventually go to waste management. But before we get to that point, tell us just a little bit about your early career.
Yeah, so I got out of law school and actually started practicing law in Dallas before coming back to Houston.
Mm-hmm.
And back in those days, a trial lawyer was a trial lawyer was a trial lawyer. We didn't have specialties. If you could try a breach of contract case, then you could try a negligence case, or you could try any other type of case. And so I was doing a little bit of everything. I came back to Houston for family reasons, and the law was changing at that time that allowed employment discrimination cases to be tried by a jury trial. Before the law changed, it had to be a judge trial.
Okay.
So you had a lot of lawyers who were doing that, but never couldn't try a case before a jury. And so it created an opening. And so I said, I would love to specialize in that, just employment discrimination law.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, I did that for about 17 years before deciding to make a career change.
Did you ever try any criminal cases?
I kind of.
Yeah.
Well, the direct answer is no. And so I had a couple of cases. Now, I say I didn't try them because in both cases we pleaded out. But I did put on evidence because we had one of my clients was a postal worker who was stealing credit cards out of his mail bag to support a drug habit. And so he was indicted both on federal and state charges, the federal charge obviously being stealing from the U.S. Postal Service.
Right.
And so we pleaded guilty. And so now the judge was going to decide punishment. And so I was trying to put on evidence to show he was really basically a good guy. And so I talked to his mother, and his mother said, we'll get the pastor of our church to come and testify and say what a great young man he really is. He just kind of went sideways.
Okay.
So I put the pastor on the stand, and he was just kind of overdoing it. He just said, Derek is a fine young man. Derek always came to church every Sunday. Derek, led the choir. Derek did this. Derek did that. And finally, I'm wincing. And finally, the judge says, do you mean the defendant, Darren? Not Derek. In other words, he didn't even know the guy's name.
Oh, no.
Yeah. But the judge laughed. And so, that was my only foray. I had another case where we also, only thing we did is put on evidence as to punishment. But that, criminal, that's one of the areas of law that you really have to just specialize in. I mean, you can't do it a little bit, at least in my opinion. And so the only time I did is when somebody got appointed.
Makes sense. Then you went to work at Waste Management, which I think many people in your life and me sitting here now think was a very interesting choice. The company had done a very large restating at that point. What made you decide to take this job? And give our listeners who may not be aware of the situation a little bit of background on what was happening.
Yeah, so I guess there were two things going on, one from my perspective and one from the company's. So as I stated earlier, I was a trial lawyer for 17 years, and that is an extremely tough way to make a living. There's a lot of stress in the job, and at this time, my wife and I, we still have 3 children, but at the time they were 3 young children. And I literally was working 6 days a week, and I felt I wasn't spending enough time with our kids, and it was time I felt for a career change.
Yeah,
I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just felt, I would start at least considering opportunities, if not aggressively looking for them. And so one day I got a phone call from a headhunter asking if I had any interest in going in-house, meaning working for a corporation as their in-house lawyer. And I said, yeah, maybe so. And I said, what company is it? And they said, well, we want to get a little bit more information to gauge your interest first. And that kind of set up a little bit of an alarm in my head.
Yeah, I hear the music playing.
Yeah. And so after a little bit more discussion, the headhunter said, it's waste management. And as you alluded to, at that time, waste management was the largest accounting restatement in the history of U.S. commerce. And my first reaction was, are they even still in business? And they said, yeah. Basically, the board fired everyone with the exception of one person, which is also an interesting story. And they're replacing everyone from the senior vice president level to the vice president level, et cetera. And so I said, well, it's at least worth going to talk to these people to see what if it was be anything that would have any interest to me. And so I did. And I talked primarily to the general counsel, who was my first boss at Waste Management, a man by the name of Larry O'Donnell, who we may talk about later because Larry O'Donnell was also the first undercover boss that there was. And so Larry and I talked for several weeks. And after every conversation, I got a little bit closer to thinking I might want to do this. And you have to understand, to leave the private practice of law to work for a company that had a terrible reputation at that time was a significant move. When you leave the private practice of law and go in-house, you're giving away your clients. And if it becomes a bad decision, your clients are gone. You're going to have to literally start all over again. And so I remember the very last meeting I had with Larry before I decided to accept his job offer. And he said, I can tell you're almost there, but something's holding you back. And I said, Larry, it's pretty simple. I said, this is a big risk for me. I have 3 small children. I can't really afford to make a mistake. And I'm just wondering if I'd be making a mistake. And he looked at me, I'll never forget this line. He says, Mark, you have to understand, we're a $16 billion startup. We can be imaginative. And what he meant by that was, unlike other startups, this company had $16 billion in revenue. We just had to go back and learn how to get the bills out. We needed, so our computers could talk with one another. This was after a merger with USA Waste. There's a lot of opportunity here, but we're starting with $16 billion in cash every year. And I just remember thinking, this is probably the closest I'm going to come to a startup situation where you really do roll the dice. And I thought the odds were in our favor. So I decided to do it. And it turned out to be the absolute best decision, at least from a financial standpoint in my life. I loved the work. I loved the people. And it was rewarding financially.
And then you ended up involved with Undercover Boss.
Yeah, I did. That was interesting also.
Well, tell us more about that.
So I'm assuming everyone knows about Undercover Boss. We were the first company featured on Undercover Boss. It happened right after one of the Super Bowls. So there was a lot of publicity about it beforehand. When the producers first came to Waste Management with the proposal, I knew nothing about it. Mm-hmm. And so one Saturday, I'm sitting at home. I get a phone call from our head of corporate communications. And she said, do you know what Larry's doing? I said, you mean today? And she goes, no, do you know what he's doing while he hasn't been at the office? I said, no idea. And she said, well, it's very confidential. I need you to sign a non-disclosure agreement before I can talk to you about it. And so I hung up on her. And she called back and she goes, we got disconnected. I said, no, we didn't get disconnected. I hung up. She goes, why'd you hang up on me? And I said, because I'm an attorney for the company. I'm bound by privilege. I'm not signing a non-disclosure agreement. My law license is worth more than any non-disclosure agreement. And she goes, well, the producers are really insisting upon it. And so I hung up on her again. Then she called me back and said, please don't hang up. And so anyway, I said, okay, well, just don't ask me to sign a non-disclosure agreement. And so she explained to me what Larry was doing. The concept of the show, I'm sure all of y'all are familiar with, is at the time Larry was the president and chief operating officer of the company. Concept of the show, of course, is that he goes to some of our facilities undercover. They don't know who he is. And so she brought to me, I should say, several issues that were coming up that she needed a legal opinion on. And then that just continued during the entire filming of the show, some of these issues that we had to try to manage our way through.
What was the outcome of it? Do you feel like you guys learned from the show, and was it a success overall?
Yeah, we definitely learned from the show. Larry was the absolute perfect person to represent the company. Now, understand, Larry wasn't the CEO, and in most other episodes, it was the CEO who goes undercover.
Yeah.
Larry had a way with people that I think that's why the show, especially that first episode, was so successful. Some of the really great stories about it, unfortunately, for the same reasons I hung up on Lynn, I can't discuss now because, again, even though I'm no longer their attorney, it's still bound by attorney-client communication. But the type of issues, and I think you understand the concept of the show. The concept is that the executive goes in and he's working the lowest level jobs, and he sees problems that he didn't see as, in this case, president and COO of the company, and he solves those problems. And that's the concept. Well, some of those problems can't be solved without legal consequences to them. And so I was always in some kind of fight with the producers of the show who wanted to do something, and I kept on saying, we can't do that because we'd be violating certain labor laws or we'd be violating our collective bargaining agreement. So they were becoming frustrated with me, and I also with them a little bit too. But, there were a couple of things that don't violate attorney-client communication privilege. One of them, for example, there was an episode, I'm sorry, not an episode, but a segment of the show in which he's having lunch with one of the recycling managers. And all of a sudden she stands up and says, "Oh my God." And she goes running down the hallway and the cameras are following her. And she, punches in her card to show she's back in work. And Larry's following her and says, what was the problem there? And she goes, "Well, the rule is that if for every minute you are late in clocking back in, the company docks you 2 minutes." Well, if that were true, that would violate not only federal labor law, but also New York labor law. And when that part of the episode appeared on TV, the next day, I get a phone call from someone from the New York State Attorney General's office wanting to know why we're violating state law.
Always a fun phone call to get.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like getting a letter from the IRS that says you got money back. Like, it's still, the 10 seconds is like, all right, is this going to be the worst?
Yeah, but fortunately, that was something I didn't know about. She was confused. Above the time clock, there was a conversion table between military time and real minutes, 60 minutes in an hour.
Yeah.
And so what I was trying to say was that, 0.01 in military time is equal to 2 minutes, let's say.
Okay.
And so that there really wasn't a violation. We were able to show that, and, they kind of went away. I think the other one I thought was also of interest was, again, this just shows my ignorance on how Hollywood works. and that it's really about the producers of the show. So after the episode airs, Oprah wants to have an interview with Larry. And the producers of Oprah, they have these, pre-interview meetings. And, at least back in those days, Oprah always wants to do something big, like, what is it? One episode she gave a car to everybody, or television to everybody.
Yeah.
So she goes, "Wouldn't it be great? This is what we need to do. This is what we need to do on our show. We're going to end the show. And Larry, we want you to say, we're so happy about this that every waste management employee gets Monday off or Friday off or whatever day it was." Well, first of all, that's several tens of millions of dollars in wages in which there's no work performed. But moreover, our clients, our customers, households want their garbage picked up.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And so, but Oprah's people didn't understand we can't just give everybody the day off. So, like I said, it was very eye-opening to me because, what makes good television doesn't necessarily make good business. So, anyway.
That is unquestionably true. And in fact, I think frequently the two are at odds with each other. This was part of the issue for me in working in television and writing for television, was everything is built around conflict. And so when I see a conflict, my instinct, my inclination is always to go, all right, where's the common ground? How can we solve this problem? How can we move together? And in TV, the question is always, for the first 2/3, 3/4 of the scene, is how can you move apart? And sometimes even at the end of the scene, it's you go away still mad at each other, or you go away not having figured out the problem. And I don't like scenes like that. I mean, I watch them because that's what we watch. We watch conflict, we watch tension. But I always have to fight against that instinct in the development of a scene, because the scene is the conflict.
Well, and also like when in our episode, when Larry goes to work at one of our landfills, I think the original scene was going to be, about him trying to operate. I'm not exactly sure. All I know is the producers saw that when the wind blows above a landfill, it tends to push paper down the landfill hill. And I think they thought it would be just a great scene to have Larry go around trying to get all those pieces of paper up. And it made for good television, but you're going, okay, well, that's not really a part of the job. But it did make for good television.
Did he have the stick with the little thing on the end of it?
Yeah. Yep.
There you go. You mentioned the collective bargaining agreement earlier, and how you interact with HR and so forth, and then you took over the HR department. How did that happen?
Yeah, how did that happen? So the previous chief HR officer leaves the company, and Waste Management looked both internally and externally for his successor, and I was one of the internal candidates for the job. Quite honestly, I didn't feel that I was going to be the successful candidate, but I was interested in it for a couple of reasons. Number one, I saw it as an opportunity to elevate the department. And the other reason was, quite honestly, I was still in legal, but my next step would have been to general counsel. And we had a great general counsel at the time, Rick Wittenbreaker, and Rick wasn't going anywhere. Okay. And so if I wanted to elevate my position, that might mean going somewhere else. And so when this opportunity came, it was close enough to what I was doing that I threw my hat into the ring. And I was as surprised as anyone when they chose me for the position. That was my aha moment. And so when I finally got the job, when they finally informed me that I was being promoted to senior vice president in charge of HR, one of the first things I had to do was go and meet with the people who were in the HR department, at least in Houston, in a town hall setting. So there were a lot of people there. And you have to understand, maybe it's probably not Waste Management thinking. It's pretty much all corporations. The HR people there, great people, but they were looking at the fact that the person that was promoted was not an HR person.
Right.
In the legal department. And so it was
the first thing that popped into my head when I saw it.
Yeah. And it was like, oh my God, it's bad enough that they didn't hire an HR person. They hired a lawyer to do this. And they thought it was all going to be about compliance. And so one of the two things about that first talk with my new subordinate employees, one was I wanted to let them know about a recent survey that had been given to all of the 17 area vice presidents of the company. The area vice presidents run geographic areas, geographic units of the company, and they constitute all of the United States and Canada. Mm. And I explained to them that they had done this survey, and there were two results from that survey that were significant. One was they asked the 17 area vice presidents which corporate departments were the most important. Mm. They also asked which of the corporate departments are you most disappointed in? They're not executing, they're not performing.
Right.
And I said, listen, guys, I'm going to be honest with you. One thing you're going to discover about me is I'm going to be very transparent with you. And I shared with them, they had not heard this before. I shared with them the results of that survey. And I said, here's the good news. The area vice presidents recognize your importance. You came in number 2 as the most important, right after sales, as the most important department in the company. Yeah. You came in dead last on execution. And I said, that is such a tremendous opportunity. Now they're looking at me with, what are you saying? You're saying we're the worst. I'm saying, yeah, but I don't have to convince anybody of how important this department is. They already know it. Now we just have to execute, and we just need to change the things around. So that was, one of my one of my first. The other part of that same talk was that I remember one young person asked me what my HR strategy was. And I laughed. I said, I don't know. And they're, of course, now shocked. And I said, no, let me explain to you why I don't know. And I said, we overstate, or there's books and articles written on strategy, specifically corporate strategy or business strategy. I said, I'm going to simplify it this way. I said, corporate strategy is very simple. It's what businesses do we want to be in?
Right.
What businesses do we want to compete in? Then you go down to business strategy, and it's how are we going to win? How are we going to win in that particular business? And I said, guys, HR strategy is how do we help that business unit win? Okay, with respect to recruiting, with respect to selection, with respect to training, with respect to all of these things. I don't know at this point, this is when I first got the job, I don't know where the disconnect is. Because remember, they're already saying we're not executing.
Yeah.
So the first thing I had to do was determine where are we failing before I can come up with an HR strategy.
Yeah. Where did it turn out they were failing, and where did you go to, what did you do to solve that problem? So
going back, remember I said the company from an operations standpoint is run by these 17 area vice presidents.
Right.
One of the first things I did once I got the job was I met individually with all 17 area vice presidents.
Yeah.
And I asked them that very specific, very easy question, where are we failing?
Yeah.
The number one example that they gave me is a metric that we call time to fill. And what that simply means is from the time that a requisition for an employee is approved,
yeah,
and with respect to our truck drivers, until the time that that person actually has their bottom in the seat and is driving the truck, at that time was 65 days. And that was totally unacceptable. In other words, you lose a truck driver who's picking up the garbage and that person quits. On average, it was taking us 65 days to get a new driver. And they said, it's way too long. We can't do that.
Yeah.
So what I had to do was I had to figure out, well, why is it taking 65 days? And the way of doing that is to break it down to its individual component parts.
Yeah.
You know, how is a requisition made? Who needs to approve the requisition? How are we recruiting? How are we selecting? How are we interviewing? And look at all of these, I call them handoffs. It would go from one person to another. And we had to eliminate the handoffs. You know, using the football analogy, you know, if you keep laddering the ball a lot, you're going to probably fumble at one point. So let's try to remove some of these laterals that were going on. And so we did a deep dive into each of those individual component parts of the hiring process. And we said, do we really need to have this? Is it okay to make a mistake with respect to one of these because it will reduce our time to fill? And so I made a pledge to these 17 area market vice presidents. I said, we will get down to 45 days, give me a year.
Yeah.
They said, you have 6 months. And so we did. We removed things, and sometimes what that meant is we didn't always have the best hires. But if we did it quicker, then we could have more people into the positions. And so what that did, though, is it allowed them being the area vice presidents, to identify the number one issue. Then we executed on that, and that gave us credibility on all the other issues that were coming up, because now they saw that we were able to execute.
Did you ever find out why they wanted to do it? Why you said a year and they said, no, 6 months is more reasonable. Like how were they able to choose that deadline?
The HR department in a lot of companies is not always considered by its peers to be the best company. To be the best department.
Yeah.
It's for a lot of different reasons. Number one, you're dealing with people. Okay. Number two, everybody thinks that they can do HR. because we're all employees and we know what's important to us. And so, not everybody thinks they can be a lawyer, and so they don't question the legal department. Not everybody thinks they can be a salesperson because, I can or cannot sell. But everybody thinks they can run HR. And so the HR departments at a lot of companies, and to an extent at Waste Management, has a reputation. And one of those elements of this reputation is what should take anybody else X number of minutes to do something will take HR 2X, okay? And so when you go to them and say, we'll correct this in a year, their thinking is that is typical HR speak.
Yeah.
You can do it sooner than a year.
Okay.
That's really what it comes down to.
Is that, now I'm wondering, was the perception of HR as the 17th ranked department in terms of execution, is that always, is there kind of an adverse selection problem where HR is always perceived as being one of the worst departments in the company, even if it's actually doing its job really well?
Yes. For example, in my compensation management class, okay, I tell the students one thing they have to learn is that the other executives in the company think they can manage compensation. Why? Because they know what motivates them personally. And they think that what motivates them motivates every other employee in the company. And the reality is that's just not true.
Yeah.
The people who are critical of the HR department don't recognize that. And so it just takes a lot of education. It takes, in the case on the time to fill example that I gave, it was going back and not just saying, hey, we reduced the number of days, but it's going back and explaining to them, these are all of the elements that are required in our hiring process. You, operations manager, created a lot of these, okay? An example of that is the operations people do not want HR only to interview. They want their supervisors to interview a prospective employee. One of the things that we did was we said, okay, that's fine, but we must have control of your calendar, because what we saw was a lot of times we'd identify a candidate for a job, but then they couldn't get an interview for 2 weeks. Well, if I can cut out that 2 weeks, I'm halfway to my goal.
Right.
And so we told them, in exchange for our promise of what we're going to do, each of the supervisors that are making these hiring decisions has to block off time in their calendar that we have access to, and we can just plug in interviews there. Again, shortening the amount of time. But part of this is educating them on what the problems are. And the problems don't just lie in HR. One of the things that always amazed me, I could not understand this until I got into my position, was when there's a turnover problem. Too many people are quitting. It's a hockey stick type of graph. First of all, with respect to our truck drivers, if we had a truck driver for a year, they're going to be with us 20 years. Now, that's a little bit of an overstatement, but there's some validity to it. But here's the thing I discovered. Most of or a significant portion of our turnover was happening in the first 2 weeks of employment. In other words, somebody was coming to work for us thinking they wanted to work, and they realized this was a much harder job. It was a stinkier job. It was fill in the blank. What did that tell me? We were doing a poor job of onboarding. In other words, we need to tell the people even before they're hired, this is what the job is going to entail. The television commercials that you see where there's a waste management truck and it's pristine and it's green, that truck has never picked up a load of garbage in its entire life, okay? Our trucks tend to be a little bit older. They have problems with it. You're going to come to work every day and maybe you smell great, but here's what I'm going to tell you. When you leave, you're not going to smell great because you've been dealing with garbage all day. Part of it is just this onboarding process. Now, I'm sorry, I kind of went astray there. But when there was a turnover issue, a lot of operations people thought that's an HR problem. What is HR doing wrong? Well, we don't control turnover. People quit generally because of either the job itself, their supervisors, whatever. It's not an HR issue. And so in a lot of respects, HR was a dumping ground for any problem that came up with respect to our employees leaving.
Right. But then, so how did you manage that expectation? Like, did you just tell people during the interview process, hey, you're not going to smell great when you leave the job?
Yeah, well, that's part of the education process with respect to our prospective employees. It's, actually taking them out there and letting them see the truck that they're going to drive, letting them smell the area that they're going to be in. But the other part really, Ben, was the fact educating our supervisors and those people in operations. From an HR standpoint, we don't control the day-to-day operations of the company. And again, people leave for various reasons. And so, we, with respect to those areas of the country in which our turnover was high, we did a deep dive into those areas. Why are people leaving? Is it compensation? Are we not paying as much as our competitors? Is it a lousy supervisor? Is that the reason people are leaving? And one of the things, by the way, we found out was, exit interviews, especially in that type of position, are difficult to do, number one, and of limited utility. One of the things that we did, and this actually was through our labor relations group, is we would just talk with the incumbent drivers there and just ask, what's it like to work here? And we found a lot of people say, I'd leave if I had a better opportunity. Well, that tells us something now. Okay. Yeah. So why would you consider leaving? And then it just becomes a matter of educating the people who are running the company. Guys, we're not paying as much as the place right across the street. Okay. And those, a significant portion of our population, I don't want to say living paycheck to paycheck, but an extra 50 cents an hour really makes a difference in their lives. And so we have to recognize that and do something about it.
Yeah. Then at one point you met Cindy Crawford.
Yes. So yeah, that's probably one of the most exaggerated stories in my life, but it's been exaggerated by me. We had an event that we were one of the sponsors of at Camp Pendleton, right outside San Diego. And it was a concert for the Marines there and their families, nobody else. So you couldn't buy a ticket to it. Yeah. And all these celebrities came out to support the Marines and their families. And so I found myself backstage. I had not planned on going. I just kind of accidentally ended up there. And I noticed a woman that was having some issues with her small child, her son. And I just casually said, kids are difficult at this age. And Cindy Crawford responded, yeah, do you have kids? And so I said, yeah, I've got 3 of them. And so we started talking about children and some of the difficulties that parents have, especially working parents. And then the greatest fortune in my life was when the waste management photographer came by and said, can I get a picture of y'all? And so I probably had the biggest smile I've ever had in my life on my face when that picture was taken. Once I got the picture, the photo, I sent it literally to every person I know that I had an email address for. And received a lot of comments. The 2 best comments was first from my wife, who responded, this has to be the most beautiful woman in the world. You don't stand a chance, boy. And then also a comment I received later in the day from a good friend of mine, Bruce Kemp. I'll never forget this because he said, I've been studying this picture all day long. And he says, I'm just wondering, do you think Cindy has forwarded this to her supermodel friends going, God, guess who I met this weekend? And so it was, like I said, it was a great opportunity. And the thing is, we had to leave early that night. And so we were in the parking lot because we had to fly out to another place. And I didn't even know who this person was at the time. But from the parking lot, we could hear, "Now welcome to the stage, Beyonce," who I didn't even know who Beyonce was at the time. And then I found out later I missed something significant. So,
Yeah. Celebrity encounters are such a funny thing. But narrowly missed celebrity encounters in some cases. The way that this story, this particular chapter comes to a close is you mentioned previously that your goal when you left Waste Management was not to get on an airplane for a year and not to get your hair cut. What changed your mind, launched you into yet another career?
Okay, well, there's two parts to that question. First, what changed my mind about not getting on an airplane and not getting a haircut? I thought it was going to be a beach bum. I really did. And so my wife changed that decision about not getting a haircut or getting on an airplane. She wanted to take a vacation to Europe, and so that kind of forced me on an airplane. Not getting my haircut, I quickly also, through my wife, realized that long hair on a 14-year-old, as I did when I was 14, is a lot different than long hair on a 58-year-old man. It just doesn't look as good. So, that did not take a lot of convincing. Coming out of retirement and going to Mays, it was, and I've referred this, and I know it sounds very cliche, and I apologize, but it was just kind of a dream come true. I had experience in teaching at our church. I taught young married couples for a lot of years and thoroughly enjoyed teaching. And so not only was I going to get the opportunity to teach young people again, but it was at my alma mater. It was at Texas A&M, and I love Texas A&M. And so, if somebody had said at the time of retirement, if you could do one more thing, what would be your dream job? It would have been to be a professor at Texas A&M. That's why I said, why I said earlier, I was talking to a private equity firm at the time. From a financial standpoint, I should have gone there. But this was my dream job. And so that's what brought me here.
And the young people you mentioned that you taught in Sunday school, all of that kind of culminates in your 60th birthday party. Yeah.
I hate to admit to the listeners that I'm 60. I'm actually over 60 now. But we had a 60th birthday party here at our house. And it was probably one of the most memorable events of my life because the people who attended represented pretty much every facet of my life, both family and friends. People I went to grade school with, people I went to high school with, people I went to college with, people I went to law school with, people I worked with, both at the law firm and at Waste Management. And then finally, that second group of people that was very emotional for me was all of these couples that I had taught in Sunday school when they were young married couples were coming back for this party. And a lot of these couples coming back weren't young marrieds anymore. They were more middle-aged married now. Yeah. And now have their own kids and their own issues. And so just being able to see them and have that visual representation kind of your life. I know you and people who are listening are way too young to know this, but there used to be a show called This Is Your Life. And they would, have somebody and then they would bring, there'd be a voiceover and then the person would have to identify. That's what I felt like that night. This is your life, because I saw all these different people. Like I said, probably one of the most memorable days of my life was that 60th birthday party.
That's wonderful. That is wonderful. Let's move to, that's a perfect segue to rapid fire. What important truth do very few people agree with you on?
One of my all-time favorite books is Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand.
Yeah.
And a summary of her philosophy is that every man, every person should be able to live his or her life the way he or she wants, unless it infringes upon the rights of another to do likewise. People think they agree with that philosophy. You ask 2 or 3 questions and you quickly find out that they don't. So that's probably the one truth that I do believe that most people don't.
It's a very libertarian way of thinking, and I don't know if I walk that statement all the way through, but I believe in the power of that way of thinking. So I have a lot of respect for that.
So, by the way, it is a libertarian view, and the one story I'll tell you about that was I read Atlas Shrugged the summer before my second year of law school.
Yeah.
It was also during the 1980 presidential election.
Oh.
And so in Waco, Texas, you could see how many votes went to each candidate in your precinct. And my roommate was also a libertarian. And so we saw that the libertarian candidate, Ron Paul, got 3 votes. We knew that I was one, my roommate was the other. We never did find that third person. I think that was a libertarian. We chalked it up. It was probably somebody who made a mistake.
Fair enough. If you could have a billboard anywhere with anything on it, where would it be and what would it say?
Easy. It would be across the street from Dodger Stadium in Los Angeles, and it would say, Houston Astros 2017 World Series champions, get over it.
I love that. What do you consider your most valuable failure?
My first jury trial. That I tried, even in hindsight, what I thought was an absolutely perfect case. At the end of the trial, when it went to the jury, the judge said, everybody in the courtroom knew it was my first trial. The judge says, congratulations, Mr. Schwartz, looks like you just won your first trial. The opposing attorney came up to me and says, congratulations, looks like you won your first trial. Jury comes back, pours us out. We lose. I quickly learned that as an attorney, as a trial attorney, you can do the very best you can. But sometimes you're just going to lose, and I've had since then, doctors tell me that one of the biggest hurdles that they had to overcome was that occasionally, and hopefully not very much, but somebody was going to die on the operating table. You can do the very best you can, but sometimes you're going to get a bad result, and you can't let that define you. You just have to keep moving on from that.
Yeah. Anyone you would like to send some good bull?
I'd like to send good bull to my daughter, Caroline. Caroline is our middle child. She had some very significant health issues as a young adult. So she went back to college later than most of her peers, and she is just kicking butt. I mean, she is doing so well in accounting. And we're not talking about some easy major either. We're talking about in accounting. She's doing great. And so I'd like to send good bull to her.
Good bull to you, Caroline. Mark, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time. Thanks for the discussion. This was a lot of fun for me. I hope it's fun for you too.
It was. Thanks so much.
We hope you enjoyed that episode as much as we did. One of my favorite parts was the random transition to Cindy Crawford. Like, we don't need it. We don't need a transition here. We're just going to go straight into this question. It was really cute.
I was looking for a segue, and eventually I was like, there is no segue. Just ask the question.
Sorry, Kyle. We got nothing to help you transition here. We're just going to jump over. Kyle, whenever I don't transition well, he likes to put in a chime or something. So maybe Kyle will have put a chime in on your Cindy Crawford transition.
I also like that the Ringer uses for their transitions. They use this kind of wind
whoosh,
like a whoosh, whoosh sound. But it almost sounds like a book closing or something. There's like a little bit of a thud at the end of it. And so I wonder if we'll get the whoosh thud.
Yeah, we'll see what Kyle has done. Well, for our MasterCast top 3 takeaways, I wanted to start with the fact that HR is always hated or often hated. And I don't think it's just HR. It seems to me like it might be all the units that really are in charge of something related to compliance. And so it could be contracts, HR, budgeting, maybe, any of those units that are kind of controlling something compliant related can feel like a barrier to getting the rest of the business strategy done.
Yeah.
But I had never really thought about it that way, that HR would be disliked or criticized. And the reason that Mark gave was because everyone thinks they can do that job, or at least do that job better, right? Like, oh, I can do that better. And I never had really thought about that before as being why those units might get criticized. And I know I could not do HR's job, PS. I wouldn't want to and couldn't do it. But I can understand the criticism when you don't fully understand a unit like that.
Never have I ever done that math either. And I think that if you really dig all the way to the bottom of it, it comes from many people, maybe not everyone, but many people's lack of skill in individualization. And for people for whom individualization is not a strength, especially those for whom like equality is particularly important, they might be the most likely, or justice is, I think justice is, I don't know if that's a strength.
Consistency.
There you go. For those people, they might be the ones who are most vulnerable to sort of a shadow side misevaluation of the importance and the competence of HR.
Right.
Because their answer might be just, why don't we just treat everyone the same? These fools are not doing their job because they're not treating everyone the same. And by the way, the same that's based on what I would like. So let's just do that. And why can't you idiots do your job?
That's true. For our second takeaway, it's kind of related. I thought that it was interesting too that HR strategy is maybe less clear than business strategy, and that the importance of HR strategy is less apparent sometimes than business strategy, general business strategy, or like a sales strategy or an operations strategy, but how important that HR strategy really is. And for Mark, what I heard most in his conversation about what he did at Waste Management was that he still had an HR strategy, and specifically he used data. Like he talked about that survey he had from leaders in the company that said HR was the second most important function, but performing the poorest, that he used data to really address the problems the company was experiencing, like the time it took to acquire talent. And he seemed to really realign the organization from just compliance, which his employees were worried because he was coming from a legal perspective that he was going to focus on compliance. He really took that unit from a compliance focus to an org strategy focus and really said, what can we do to advance the strategy of the company to help other units perform their job better? And it seems like a hard shift to make in those units that are more compliance driven, but really important to kind of not take the wind out of everybody's sails, right? When you are trying to hire good talent and the bottleneck is in HR, that's really frustrating and really difficult for people.
Yeah, I get that. And I think the most compelling thing in all of that, though, is one of the first things that you said, which is that HR strategy is not as clear as business strategy. And I hear that, and I think that's the frontier. That's where the potential value adds are. And if you can bridge that gap effectively, you gain so much more there. And in other departments that experience the same thing, then the gains are much more compelling and much less incremental in departments where the frontier is not well understood.
Yeah, that's true. And HR strategy does exist. It's just less maybe understood by everyone else, or emphasis is not given to it by other people in the organization as much as strategy might be given for another unit. So, yeah, it's really important.
Yeah.
For our last takeaway, I wanted to talk about Undercover Boss just because that was cool. And I always think it's so interesting the things that organizations find out on when their leadership participates in that show. What was an interesting takeaway for you from the Undercover Boss conversation?
Well, the first thing I thought of was that Damon Diamoir, a good friend of the show, former guest, was a producer on Undercover Boss. And
that's cool.
I wonder if he was on that particular episode. I'm gonna reach out and ask him.
Well, it was the very first one, right? That's pretty cool too. It's pretty amazing that the organization said, yeah, we'll let our COO go on that show when the show had not been established. And I think there's a lot of good things that came out of that show for organizations, but you certainly don't know that on episode 1.
Yeah, no question. I would be interested to hear, now having heard the stories about that episode from this side, I would be interested to hear the stories about that episode from the other side.
The production side, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is really interesting, the production side of like, hey, we want to do this big thing, and that's not realistic. And Mark had to be the one to tell everybody that. And then, I thought just how many things a leader finds out when they look at it from the perspective of their employees is really interesting.
Yeah. A lot of interesting things wrapped up in that.
Ben, you want to close us with a quote?
I would love to close us with a quote. This is actually from a book I'm reading for the third time, I think. So Stephen King is my favorite novelist, and his work in the last decade has been a little uneven, but when he's at his best, he is still as good as he ever was. So, like the Toby Keith song. So I think his 2 best things that he's written this decade, I did not enjoy The Outsider as much as some people did. It's now a successful TV show and maybe better as a TV show than it was as a book. It opened really strong and did not close quite as strong, but End of Watch was outstanding. Mr. Mercedes was very good, and The Institute was very good, published in 2018. So this is a quote from Stephen King's novel, The Institute. "There's an abyss, okay?" said Luke. "Sometimes I dream about it. It goes down forever, and it's full of all the things I don't know. I don't know how an abyss can be full. It's an oxymoron, but it is. It makes me feel small and stupid, but there's a bridge over it, and I want to walk on it. I want to stand in the middle of it and raise my hands." They watched, fascinated and a little afraid, as Luke raised his hands to the sides of his narrow, intense face. The pizza pan was now not just shivering, but rattling, like the plates sometimes did in the cupboards. Luke finished, "And all those things in the darkness will come floating up. I know it."
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
An MBA from Texas A&M University can take your career to a whole new level. With full-time and weekend options, Texas A&M suits your schedule. So get a better gig. Visit mba.tamu.edu.
Looking to start a podcast? Trying to tackle questions like, how do I record? How do I edit? How can I get music for my show? What equipment do I need? How do I distribute it? Good news. The podcast architects are here to help. Whether that's from start to finish, fixing the audio quality, helping you get the episodes posted, go to podconsulting.co. Everyone has something worth sharing with the world.